Jack Turner pressed his daughter's tiny body against his chest and made a sound no grown man should ever have to make. Not a cry, not a prayer, just something raw and broken that died in his throat before it could become either one. Lily wasn't moving right. She was too still, too quiet, burning alive from the inside out. And the closest doctor was 40 miles away in a summer that had already taken everything from him. He had nothing left to give her, and he knew it. If this story already has your heart, hit that subscribe button right now and follow along until the very last word, because this one doesn't let go easy. And drop your city in the comments below. I want to see how far this story travels. The summer of 1879 came down on Dry Willow, Colorado, like a punishment. It wasn't the dry kind of heat that just sat on your shoulders and wore you out. It was the kind that cracked the ground open, turned the creek beds to dust, and made the air taste like iron and old ash. The kind of heat that got into your lungs and stayed there. Cattle were dying on ranches 20 miles out. Wells were going bad. And in the valley just east of the ridge, where the cottonwood trees had already gone yellow 2 months early, Jack Turner was losing his daughter. He hadn't slept in 4 days. Not real sleep, anyway. He closed his eyes twice, once sitting upright in the chair beside Lily's crib, once with his back against the wall and his boots still on. But both times he'd snapped awake before an hour passed, heart slamming, reaching for her before he was even fully conscious. It had become reflex, the kind that lives in a father's chest like a second heartbeat. Lily was 11 months old, small even for that, because she'd come early and the world hadn't been kind to her since. She had her mother's eyes, wide, gray, serious, like she was always thinking about something just out of reach. Ruth had laughed about that. "She's already got opinions, Jack. Lord help us both." That had been 8 months ago. Ruth had said it standing at the kitchen window with Lily on her hip. And then 4 weeks later, Ruth was gone. And now Lily was burning up with a fever that had been climbing for 3 days straight. And Jack was standing in the middle of the room, talking to a God he wasn't sure was listening anymore. "I don't need much," he said out loud. His voice came out rougher than he intended, scraped raw from 2 days of whispering to Lily and shouting at horses, and not drinking enough water. "I ain't asking for myself. You know I stopped doing that a long time ago." He pressed the back of his wrist to Lily's forehead and felt the heat radiating off her like a coal stove. His jaw locked. Just her. That's all. Just let her be okay. Lily made a small sound. Not a cry. She was past crying. Which was the part that scared him most. Crying meant fight. Crying meant she was still in there, still pushing back against whatever was pulling at her. This sound was quieter. Tired. Like she was asking a question she already knew the answer to. Jack picked her up, very carefully, the way he'd learned to do in the first panic weeks after Ruth died, when every movement felt like he was handling something made of spun glass. He held her against his chest and walked. Just walked. Back and forth across the floorboards, because that was the only thing that had ever settled her, and because stopping felt like giving up, and he was not ready to give up. He was not going to give up. "You hear me?" he said quietly, to Lily, not to God this time. "You're Turner stock, girl. We don't quit. Your mama didn't quit. She fought for every single day she had, right up until she couldn't anymore. And that woman was the strongest thing I ever knew." His voice caught. He cleared his throat hard. "So you don't quit on me either. You understand? That's not how this goes." Lily's eyes were half open. She wasn't looking at him. She was looking at something past his shoulder, the way sick babies do, and that hollow, unfocused gaze hit him somewhere behind the sternum and didn't let go. He'd sent word to Doc Parsons in Millhaven 3 days ago, paid Chet Aldridge $2 silver to ride hard and bring the man back. Chet had come back yesterday, alone, with the news that Parsons was out on a ranch call 60 miles north and wasn't expected back for another week. There was no other doctor. There was no one with nursing training he could reach in a day's ride. There was nothing. There was only him and his dying daughter and a summer that didn't care. He set Lily down in her crib just before noon, set her down gently, tucked the thin cotton blanket around her because even in the heat she seemed to shiver. And he stood there for a long moment with his hands braced on the crib rail, staring at her. Then he turned around and went to his writing desk and picked up a pencil. He wrote 4 words, crossed them out. Wrote 6 more, crossed those out too. Then he stopped fighting the pride that kept getting in the way and just wrote what was true. My baby girl is sick and dying. I have nothing left to give her. If anyone can help, please come. J. Turner, East Valley Road. He read it twice, felt something move through him that wasn't quite shame and wasn't quite relief. Just a hollow, exhausted acknowledgement that he had run all the way to the end of himself. Then he folded the paper, walked outside into the hammer blow of the afternoon heat, and nailed it to the front door where anyone passing on the road could see it. He stood on the porch for a minute after, looking out at the road, at the empty, baked dry stretch of dirt that ran along the cottonwoods and disappeared around the bend. Nobody came. He went back inside. Margaret Maggie Calloway had not intended to read that note. She'd been taking the long way home from town, the road past the Turner place instead of the cut through her south field, because she didn't want to walk through the field where the coneflowers were coming up. That was where she and Thomas had walked on Sunday evenings, back when there had been a Thomas, and back when Sundays had meant something other than just another day to get through. The field was too much right now. So she took the road. She almost didn't stop. The note was small, just a folded piece of paper tacked to the wood, and her eyes nearly passed right over it. But something made her slow. Something made her read. And then she stood there in the burning afternoon sun for a long time, not moving. She knew Jack Turner the way you know anyone in a small valley. By sight, by reputation, by the shape of his grief. She'd seen him at Ruth's funeral, standing straight-backed and stone-faced, the way men do when they're determined not to come apart in public, holding a baby against his shoulder with a kind of terrified tenderness that made half the women in Dry Willow cry harder than they'd been crying for Ruth. She'd seen him in town twice since then, buying supplies, not talking to anyone, looking like a man who was holding himself together with pure stubbornness and not much else. She hadn't spoken to him. There wasn't a reason to. She was new enough to the valley still, just 14 months since she and Thomas had come up from New Mexico, with plans and savings and the particular optimism of people who don't yet know what a Colorado summer can do. Thomas had been dead for 7 months. The baby she'd been carrying when he died had lived for 4 days. She understood grief just fine. She stood at the gate to Jack Turner's property for another long moment. Then she unlatched it and walked up to the door and knocked. Jack heard the knock, and his first reaction was pure, startled relief. Someone had come. Someone had actually come. And then he opened the door and saw who it was, and his face did something complicated. "Mrs. Calloway," he said. She was still holding her market basket. She had flour on her sleeve, and her dark hair was coming loose from its pins in the heat. She looked tired. She looked like someone who'd been through something and was still carrying it. "Mr. Turner," she said, "I read your note." "I see that." She looked past him into the cabin. "How long has she been sick?" 3 days. "Fever?" "High, real high. Won't eat, barely crying now." Maggie's expression moved through something. A tightening around the eyes, a brief moment of something private and painful, and then settled into a kind of determined calm. "Is she taking any liquid at all?" "Tried water this morning. She took maybe 2 sips. Maggie looked at him directly then, and whatever she saw in his face must have told her everything, because she didn't ask any more questions. She just said, quietly and without any fuss, "Mr. Turner, I can feed her." Jack went very still. "I mean," she stopped. Something moved across her face that was harder to read. Then she pressed on, because she wasn't the kind of woman who stopped when something needed to be said. "I lost my own baby 7 months ago, but I've still got milk. I don't know how that's possible. The Lord works in ways I gave up trying to understand, but I've still got it. And your daughter needs it, and I'm standing on your porch. So," she met his eyes, "let me help." The silence between them was not short. Jack Turner was not a man who let people in. He'd been that way even before Ruth. And after Ruth, he'd turned the self-sufficiency up so tight that some of the men in town had stopped trying to offer condolences because it felt like walking into a wall. He didn't mean it as a rudeness. It was just the only way he knew to survive. Keep the circle small, keep the walls up, keep moving forward. Don't stop, don't need. But Lily made that sound again from inside the cabin, that small, tired, questioning sound. And Jack Turner stepped back from the door. "Come in," he said. Maggie set her basket on the table without being asked, and crossed to the crib without hesitating, and Jack watched her do it, and felt something painful move through his chest that had nothing to do with gratitude, and everything to do with how naturally she moved through his space, how easily she went to his daughter, like she'd done it 100 times before. She picked Lily up, and Lily, who had been still and glassy-eyed for the better part of a day, turned her head. Just a small movement, like a flower responding to light. "Hello, sweetheart," Maggie said softly. Her voice had changed. It had gone lower and quieter, the kind of tone that came from somewhere deep and involuntary. "I've got you now. You're all right." Jack turned away. He walked to the window and stood there with his back to the room, looking out at the road, at the empty, heat-bleached afternoon. His hands were in fists at his sides, and he was pressing his back teeth together so hard his jaw ached. He didn't know what was happening to him. He didn't want to know. He heard Lily begin to eat, heard the change in her breathing, the shift from that terrible passive quiet to something more present, more urgent, and he closed his eyes. Behind him, Maggie said nothing. She just sat in the chair by the crib and held his daughter and let the silence be what it was. After a while, Jack turned around. Lily's eyes were open, really open, the wide-awake, taking it all in kind of open that he hadn't seen in 3 days. She had her small fist wrapped around Maggie's finger. She was eating like she was starving, which she probably was, and the color in her face was not good, not yet, but better, different, like something had come back. Jack crossed the room and crouched down in front of them. He looked at his daughter for a long moment. Then he looked up at Maggie. "She's going to be okay," Maggie said. She said it simply, like a fact, not a comfort. "She's going to be just fine." Jack nodded. He couldn't speak right then. "I'll come back this evening," Maggie said, "and tomorrow morning. She needs to eat frequently for a few days to get her strength up. Her fever should break by tonight if we can keep her cool and fed." She paused. If you're willing to let me." "Mrs. Calloway." His voice came out rough. He cleared his throat. I don't have the words for this. I want you to know that. You don't need words. She shifted Lily slightly, and the baby made a contented sound that was so ordinary and healthy that Jack had to look away again. She needed someone. I was there. That's all this is. But they both knew that wasn't entirely true, because Maggie Calloway had walked past 100 gates in her life without stopping, and she'd stopped at this one. And Jack Turner had let strangers knock on his door for months without opening it all the way. And he'd opened it today. Neither of them said that out loud, but it sat between them in the warm, still air of the cabin, quiet and significant, the way important things often are when they're just beginning. Maggie came back at sundown, as she'd said she would. She didn't knock the second time. The door was open. Jack had propped it with a boot to let in the evening air, and she walked in to find him sitting on the floor beside Lily's crib, his back against the wall, his head dropped forward, dead asleep. The baby was asleep too, the deep, genuine, recovering sleep of a child whose body has decided to fight back. Maggie stood in the doorway and looked at the two of them for a moment. The last light was coming through the window at a low angle, the gold-orange kind that made everything look softer than it was. Jack Turner, even in exhausted sleep, still had that quality of contained tension about him. Broad shoulders drawn up slightly, jaw set, like his body didn't quite know how to rest even when his mind finally gave out. She set down the covered pot she'd brought, broth, nothing fancy but good, and went quietly to the crib. She put her hand to Lily's forehead. The fever had broken. It wasn't gone entirely, just cracked, dropped enough that the skin was merely warm instead of alarming, the difference between sickness fighting to hold on and a body starting to win. Maggie exhaled slowly through her nose. She stood there with her hand resting light as paper on the baby's head, and felt something move through her that was complicated and private, and not entirely about Jack Turner's daughter. She cooled down. His voice came from behind her. She turned. He was awake, sitting up straighter, running a hand over his face like he was trying to wipe the sleep off it. His eyes found Lily immediately, the way parents' eyes do, the automatic check before anything else. "Just in the last hour or so, I think," Maggie said. "Her color's better." He got to his feet, came to stand beside her at the crib. He was close enough that she could feel the warmth coming off him, and she took a half step to the side, not obvious, just giving them both a little more air. He looked at Lily for a long time without speaking. Then he said, "You saved her life. The fever did most of the work by breaking on its own. That's not what I mean, and you know it." He said it quietly, without aggression, just as a plain statement of fact. Without what you did today, she wouldn't have had the strength to fight it. Maggie didn't answer that. She moved to the table, started uncovering the pot she'd brought. "Have you eaten today?" "I don't remember." "Then sit down." She said it in the same straightforward tone she'd used all day. Not bossy, not soft, just practical. "I brought broth, for her when she wakes, and enough for you, too." He sat. She handed him a bowl, and he ate it standing at the counter, because apparently sitting still was harder for him than it looked. And she didn't say anything about that either. She just moved around the small kitchen with the quiet efficiency of someone who'd run their own household and knew how things worked. And after a while, the silence between them became something less taut and more simply easy. "You're from New Mexico," he said eventually. Not a question. He'd heard it somewhere, the way you heard things in a small valley. "Originally from Tennessee," she said. "Thomas, my husband, had family in New Mexico. We came north last year." She kept her voice even. "He died in December. Fever, like—" She stopped, started again. "He went quick. I was grateful for that at the time." Jack set the bowl down. "I'm sorry." "I know you are." She said it without irony. "You've got that look." "What look?" "The one that says you've been sorry about things for so long, it's just how your face sits now." She glanced up at him then, and something in her expression was both direct and kind. "I've got the same one, I expect." He was quiet for a moment. Then, to her surprise, something shifted in his face. Not a smile exactly, but the ghost of one, tired and real. "Reckon you do," he said. Lily stirred in her crib. Both of them turned immediately, instinctively, and when the baby settled back into sleep without waking, they both exhaled at the same time. There was a pause, and then Maggie said, quietly and with no particular intention behind it, "She's going to be a handful. Look at her, already making people worry." And Jack Turner made a sound that was not quite a laugh, but was the closest thing to it she'd heard from him all day. And it caught her off guard, the realness of it, the way it seemed to surprise even him. "Yeah," he said, "she is." Outside, the summer dark was settling over Dry Willow, and the heat was finally, mercifully beginning to release its grip on the day. Somewhere, out past the cottonwoods, a nighthawk called. Lily slept on, small and warm and breathing steady. And in the cabin, two people who had no particular reason to trust anyone sat in the near dark and did not speak, and let that be enough for now. Maggie came back the next morning before the sun was fully up. She hadn't planned to come that early. She told herself she would wait until a decent hour, give the man his privacy, his space, the particular dignity that grief-worn people needed in the early morning when the armor wasn't fully on yet. She'd told herself all of that walking home the night before, and then she'd lain awake in her own cabin, listening to the silence and thinking about that baby's fever, and whether it had climbed back up in the night. And by the time the sky started going pale, she was already dressed and moving. Jack opened the door before she could knock. He was fully dressed, boots and all, like he'd never gone to bed. Maybe he hadn't. "Fever's still down," he said, instead of "good morning." He stepped back to let her in. "Good." She came through the door and went straight to the crib. Lily was awake, lying on her back, staring up at the ceiling with that owl-eyed seriousness that seemed to be just her face, her natural expression, as if she'd arrived in the world already suspicious of it. When Maggie leaned over her, Lily's eyes moved, found her face, held there. "Hey, you," Maggie said quietly. Lily grabbed for her finger. Got it. Held on with the specific ferocity of a baby who had decided something. Behind her, Jack let out a breath that sounded like it had been held for a very long time. Maggie fed her, and this time, Lily ate like she meant it. None of the weak, reluctant half-effort of the day before, but with real hunger, real intention, the kind that meant her body had made a decision in the night and come down firmly on the side of living. When she was done, she looked up at Maggie with those wide gray eyes and made a sound that was not quite a word, and not quite just noise, but something in between. Something that sat in Maggie's chest like a coal and burned there. She set Lily carefully back in the crib and turned to find Jack watching from across the room. He had a coffee cup in both hands, and he was looking at her with an expression she couldn't fully read. Something careful and complicated. The kind of look a man gets when he's trying not to show what's actually happening inside him. "She ate well," Maggie said. "I can see that." "Another day or two of this and she'll be close to herself again." "Mrs. Calloway." He set the coffee cup down. "I want to pay you." The room went a particular kind of quiet. "No," Maggie said. "It's not charity I'm offering. You're doing work, real work. You ought to be compensated." I said no. She said it pleasantly, but she said it like she meant it, and something in her tone must have gotten through, because he didn't push further. just stood there looking like a man who wasn't used to being told no and wasn't entirely sure what to do with it. "I'm not doing this for money, Mr. Turner. I'm doing it because she needed help, and I could give it. That's the whole of it." He picked the coffee cup back up. "All right," he said finally. "Then at least let me feed you breakfast." It was such a practical, almost reluctant offer. Not warm exactly, not unfriendly, just honest, that Maggie almost smiled. "All right," she said. He cooked eggs, and they ate at the table without talking much. And Lily watched them from her crib with the gravity of a very small judge. And outside, the Colorado morning was already heating up, already pressing down. But inside the cabin, there was something almost bearable about the quiet. Almost. It was on the third morning that the trouble started. Maggie had just come up the road when she heard the wagon. She recognized it before she saw it fully. The particular rattle of the Hendersons' buckboard, which had a loose board on the left side that announced itself 50 yards before arrival. She kept walking. She had no reason to stop, and no particular feeling about the Hendersons one way or another. Thomas Calloway had liked Ben Henderson well enough. Clara Henderson had brought food after the baby died, which Maggie had appreciated. But Clara Henderson was not looking at her with the expression of a woman who had brought food. The wagon slowed. Clara's eyes went from Maggie's face to the basket on her arm, to the Turner gate behind her, and back again. And the journey that expression took in those 3 seconds told Maggie everything she needed to know about how the next few weeks were going to feel. "Mrs. Calloway," Clara said. "Mrs. Henderson." Maggie kept her voice even. "Good morning. I didn't know you were—" Clara stopped, appeared to recalibrate. "Is everything all right over here? I heard the Turner baby was sick." "She's recovering." Maggie shifted her basket. "She should be well by the end of the week." Clara looked at her. That particular look, the one that wasn't quite accusation and wasn't quite concern, but lived somewhere in the uncomfortable territory between them. "You've been coming over here," she said, not quite a question. "I have." "Every day?" "Yes." Clara said nothing for a moment. Then, "Maggie, you know how it looks." "I know how it looks to some people," Maggie said carefully. "How it actually is different. People talk. People always talk. I don't see how that's my problem, or Mr. Turner's, or his daughter's." She met Clara's eyes steadily, and whatever Clara found there seemed to give her pause. "That little girl was starving, Clara. Her mother is dead. Her father had done everything he knew to do, and she was starving. I had milk. I used it. I'm not going to apologize for that." Clara Henderson's expression did something complicated. Part of it was disapproval, the genuine, baked-in kind that wasn't malicious, just old, the product of 100 years of small-town rules about how women move through the world. And part of it was something else, something that might have been, under different circumstances, close to admiration. "Just be careful," she said finally, and clicked the horses forward. Maggie stood in the road and watched the wagon go. Then she turned and walked through the gate. She didn't tell Jack about the exchange. She wasn't sure why, whether it was to protect him from something he couldn't fix, or to protect herself from having to explain it out loud, or just because there was already enough weight in that cabin without adding more. She went in. She fed Lily. She sat at the table drinking the coffee Jack silently poured for her, and she did not say a word about Clara Henderson's face. But Jack wasn't stupid. "Something happened," he said. He was at the counter, not looking at her, working a knot out of a leather strap with his thumbnail. The set of his shoulders said he already knew, or suspected. "Nothing worth talking about." "Maggie." He said her first name and then seemed to hear himself do it, and there was a brief pause. He didn't take it back. "You've been coming here every day for a week. In a town like Dry Willow, that's not nothing." "It's nobody's business." "That's true." He set the strap down and turned around. "But true and useful aren't always the same thing, and you know that." He looked at her directly. "Are people giving you trouble?" "People are doing what people do," she said. "I'm not troubled by it." He didn't look convinced. He looked, if anything, more troubled than before. Not for himself, she realized. For her. That landed somewhere unexpected, and she felt it there for a moment, before she made herself set it aside. "Mr. Turner." "Jack." She looked at him. "You've been feeding my daughter for a week," he said, with a kind of flat directness that wasn't unkindness. "I think you can call me Jack." A beat of silence. "All right. Jack." She said it plainly. "I'm fine, I promise you. A few sideways looks from Clara Henderson aren't going to break me. I've been through worse." "I know you have." He said it quietly, without elaboration, and that simple acknowledgement, the fact that he knew, that he'd understood without her having to explain it, did something unexpected to the air in the room, made it feel closer, warmer, not entirely comfortable. Lily chose that moment to demand attention with a sound that was considerably more forceful than anything she'd managed in the past week. And they both looked at her, and Maggie was almost grateful. "There she is," Jack said, and there was something in his voice when he said it. A low, private relief, the sound of a man whose world had just gotten very slightly less terrifying. That Maggie filed away somewhere, careful, and didn't examine too closely. What nobody in Dry Willow had counted on, what Maggie herself hadn't counted on, was how quickly it started to feel ordinary. 7 days, that's all it took. 7 days of coming through that gate in the morning. 7 days of Jack's coffee waiting on the table. 7 days of Lily's grip tightening on her finger with growing confidence. The baby's health climbing back towards something sturdy and recognizable. 7 days of conversation that was cautious at first, practical, stripped to the facts, the weather, the cattle, the state of the well, the price of flour in town. And then, slowly, without either of them deciding to let it happen, it became something else. On the 8th day, Jack told her about Ruth. Not all of it. Not in one sitting. He told her about how they'd met. A cattle auction in Boulder, of all places. Ruth there with her father. Jack there to bid on a bull he didn't end up buying because he spent the whole afternoon talking to this woman who had opinions about everything and didn't see any reason to keep them to herself. He told it simply, without drama, in that flat Western cadence of his, and he was looking at his hands while he talked, not at her. The way people do when they're saying something they don't usually say out loud. Maggie listened without interrupting. When he stopped, there was a silence, and then she said, "She sounds like she was something." "She was everything," he said. Just that. No decoration, no softening. Just the plain, unadorned truth of a man who had loved someone completely and knew it. Maggie looked at the table. "Thomas used to sing," she said after a moment. "Off key, always. Didn't matter. He'd sing in the mornings while he fed the horses. I'd wake up to it." She paused. "I still listen for it sometimes. Just for a second, right when I wake up, before I remember." Jack said nothing, but he looked up from his hands, and when she met his eyes, what she found there wasn't pity. Nothing so simple or so easy as that. It was recognition. The specific, painful recognition of someone who knew exactly what that half-second of forgetting felt like, and exactly what followed it. That was the day something shifted between them. Not dramatically, not with any particular word or gesture. Just a quiet, almost invisible turning. The way the light in a room changes when the sun moves past a certain point, and you don't notice until everything looks different. On the 10th day, she arrived to find the door open and Jack not inside. Lily was in her crib, awake and investigating her own fingers with intense concentration, unbothered. Maggie checked her. Fine, healthy, the fever a distant memory now, her cheeks pink, and her grip when she reached up like a small trap springing shut, and then straightened up and went to the doorway. Jack was on the porch, not working, just standing, looking out at the road. He had a piece of paper in his hand. She stepped out. He heard her and turned, and his expression was doing something she didn't recognize. Tight, controlled, the kind of face a man puts on when he's working very hard to manage what's underneath it. "What's that?" she asked. He held it out without speaking. It was a letter from a woman named Harriet Voss in Denver. The handwriting was neat and confident, the kind of handwriting that belonged to someone who was used to getting responses. The letter was 2 pages long. Maggie read the first paragraph and understood what it was immediately. A business proposition, dressed up in the language of compassion. Harriet Voss had heard, through the letters and gossip network that connected every frontier town to every other, that Jack Turner was a widower with an infant daughter and struggling to manage both. She was offering herself as a solution. Her qualifications included domestic competence, good health, Christian faith, and the particular asset of having no prior attachments or children of her own to complicate matters. It was, in every essential way, a mail-order bride proposal. Maggie handed the letter back. "When did this come?" she asked. "Yesterday. He took it but didn't look at it. She's not the first. There have been 2 others since Ruth died. I didn't answer them." "Are you going to answer this one?" He looked at her for a moment. Then he looked away, back at the road, and his jaw was doing that locked thing again. The thing it did when he was working something out. "I don't know," he said. "Maybe I have to." "Because of what people are saying." It wasn't a question. "Because Lily needs a mother." He said it evenly, but there was something hard underneath it, something that cost him to say out loud. I can't keep going the way things are. I can manage the ranch. I can keep the place running. But a baby needs more than I can give her on my own, and you—" He stopped. "You've got your own life, your own land, your own grief. You've already given more than—" "Jack." He stopped. "I'll come back tomorrow," she said, simply, clearly, like she was stating a fact about the weather. "I'm going to come back, and I'm going to feed your daughter, and I'm going to drink your coffee, and whatever you decide about that letter, you can decide it. But don't—" She paused and chose her next words with care. "Don't decide it because you're trying to protect me from something. I'm not a woman who needs protecting from her own choices." He looked at her. Something moved through his face that she couldn't name, and didn't try to. "No," he said quietly. "I don't reckon you are." She went back inside. He stayed on the porch a while longer, and the letter stayed in his hand, unread a second time, because he already knew what it said, and he already knew what he wasn't going to do about it. And the knowing of that sat in him like something he wasn't ready to say out loud yet. Inside the cabin, Lily laughed. A real laugh, the first one since before the fever, clear and sudden and absolutely certain of itself. And both of them heard it, and neither of them said a word. And that was its own kind of answer. Lily laughed again at breakfast the next morning, and the morning after that. And by the end of the second week, she had developed a very specific and very intentional habit of reaching for Maggie the moment she came through the door. Arms up, fingers spread, that universal baby demand that allowed for no misunderstanding and no negotiation. Jack watched it happen every single time. He never said anything about it, but he watched. The days had settled into a rhythm that neither of them had designed and neither of them acknowledged out loud, the way you don't acknowledge something fragile for fear of breaking it just by naming it. Maggie came in the morning. She fed Lily. She drank the coffee Jack left on the table. They talked. More now than before. Easier now. The careful politeness of the first days worn down to something more honest. Jack would head out to work the ranch around mid-morning. Sometimes she was gone when he came back at noon. Sometimes she wasn't. On the days she wasn't, he found reasons to come in earlier than he needed to. He didn't examine that too closely. What he did examine, on a Tuesday morning when the heat had already climbed past tolerable before 8 o'clock, was the look on Hank Pruitt's face when Hank came by to return a borrowed rope and found Maggie at the table, with Lily in her lap, laughing at something, her dark hair loose around her shoulders because she'd come straight from her own place without stopping to pin it up. Hank Pruitt was 62 years old and had been ranching this valley since before Jack was born, and he had a face that had never learned to hide much. He took in the scene in the doorway. Maggie, Lily, the breakfast dishes, the general settled domesticity of it, and his expression went through about 4 different things in the space of 3 seconds. "Hank," Jack said from behind him. Hank turned, took the rope Jack held out. "Morning, Jack." His eyes went back to the cabin interior for just a beat too long. "Didn't know you had company." "Mrs. Calloway's been helping with Lily," Jack said. His voice was flat and even. "Since the fever." "That right?" It wasn't a question, either. Hank scratched the back of his neck, the way he did when he was working up to something. "Jack, I ain't one to... a man's business is his own. I've always said that." "Then say it again now," Jack said, "and keep on going." Hank looked at him, looked away. "Right," he said. "Well, you need anything, you know where I am." He walked back to his horse without another word, and Jack watched him go with his arms crossed and his jaw set. And when he turned back to the cabin, Maggie was looking at him from across the room. She'd heard every word. Of course she had. "You didn't have to do that," she said. "I know I didn't." He came back inside. "I wanted to." Something moved across her face, quick, unguarded, the kind of thing she usually kept better control of. She looked down at Lily. "People are going to talk regardless of what you say to them." "People can talk all they want. Doesn't mean I have to stand there and let them do it to your face." She didn't answer that, but her hands on Lily tightened just slightly, and she didn't look up for a moment, and Jack understood that she was working to keep her expression neutral, which meant the words had landed somewhere they weren't supposed to land. He went back outside, but he stood on the porch for a moment longer than he needed to, and the thing sitting in his chest was warm and uncomfortable and too complicated to name. The letter from Harriet Voss was still on the desk, unanswered. 3 other letters had arrived since, 2 more from Denver, one from a widow in Pueblo who included a small photograph of herself looking very determined and very ready to be useful. Jack had put them all in the same drawer without reading past the first paragraph. He wasn't sure why he kept them. He certainly wasn't going to act on any of them. What he knew, and what he was managing very carefully not to say out loud to anyone, including himself, was that the reason those letters were going unanswered had less to do with their contents and more to do with the woman who came through his door every morning and left something behind her when she went, that the cabin didn't have before she arrived. He was aware of this. He was not doing anything about it. That was Tuesday. By Thursday, the valley had opinions. He heard it first from Pete Dalton at the feed store. delivered in the sideways, apologetic way of a man who genuinely liked him, but couldn't quite stop himself. Folks are saying, now, I'm not saying I agree, Jack, you know me, but folks are saying it ain't proper. Her being over there every day. A widow woman at a widower's place? No chaperone? No... Pete, Jack said. Yeah? 2 pounds of the oats, and I'll take a sack of the coarse salt. Pete closed his mouth, got the oats. He heard it again from Pastor Mills, who had the grace to look genuinely uncomfortable about it, who came to the subject sideways, through a conversation about community and frontier morality and the appearance of things, and who clearly hadn't slept well before deciding to have this conversation, which Jack respected, even if he didn't appreciate the conversation itself. I understand what she's done for you and for that child, Pastor Mills said. And I don't doubt her intentions or yours. But appearances matter, Jack. In a community like this, appearances are how trust gets built or broken. My daughter was dying, Jack said. He said it quietly, but there was something underneath it that made the pastor go still. She was dying, and one person in this entire valley came to help. One. He held the pastor's gaze. You want to talk to me about appearances? You talk to me about what this community looked like from inside that cabin when Lily was burning up and nobody knocked. Pastor Mills left shortly after. Jack drove home in the wagon and thought about Maggie riding this same road every morning while people watched from their windows and formed their conclusions, and felt something that was partly rage and partly something else he was less comfortable identifying. He didn't tell her about any of it. He should have. He knew he should have, because she had the right to know what people were saying and to make her own decisions about it. And she'd told him herself that she didn't need protecting from her own choices. He knew all of that. But he didn't tell her. Because telling her meant having the conversation that lived on the other side of it. And he wasn't ready for that conversation. Wasn't sure he'd ever be ready. So he kept it inside, and he kept showing up at breakfast, and he kept telling himself that the situation was what it was, and nothing more. That fiction lasted until Friday afternoon. He came in from the south field at 2:30 to find Maggie still there. She'd stayed to mend one of Lily's blankets, a small task, an excuse for both of them probably. And Lily was asleep in the crib, and the cabin was quiet in the thick, pressing way of a hot afternoon. And Maggie looked up from her sewing when he came through the door and said, without preamble, "Eleanor Bryce came to see me this morning." Jack stopped moving. "When?" "While I was here. She knocked, came in, sat right where you're standing." Maggie set the sewing down. She kept her voice level, but her hands on the fabric were too precise, too controlled. She was very polite about it. She said she'd known Ruth since before Ruth married you. Said she loved that baby girl in that crib. Said all the right things first. A pause. And then she told me that what I was doing was inappropriate, that I was taking advantage of a grieving man's vulnerability, that this was not how a respectable widow conducted herself, and that if I had any decency, I would stop coming here before I made things worse for everyone. The cabin was very quiet. "What did you say?" Jack asked. "I told her thank you for stopping by." Maggie picked up the sewing again. Her hands were not quite steady. "And I held the door." Jack set his hat on the hook. He stood with his back to her for a moment. Then he turned around, and what was on his face was something she hadn't seen before. Not the contained grief, not the careful courtesy, not even the rare, almost smiles. This was something raw, something that had run out of patience. "Maggie, look at me." She looked up. "I need to say something to you, and I need you to hear it plain." He pulled out the chair across from her and sat, leaning forward, elbows on the table, close enough that she couldn't look away without making it obvious. "Eleanor Bryce and Clara Henderson and whoever else is talking, none of that is your fault. None of it is your doing. You came here and you helped my daughter, and you've been nothing but decent and good since the day you walked through that door. And if this town has a problem with that, the problem is with this town, and not with you." Maggie didn't say anything. "And I should have told you sooner what people were saying," he said. "I should have let you make your own decision. I didn't because I was—" He stopped, pressed forward. "I was afraid you'd stop coming, and that was selfish, and I'm sorry for it." The silence that followed that was different from the others, heavier, more loaded. "Jack," she said, and her voice had gone slightly unsteady, which he'd never heard before. "Why were you afraid I'd stop coming?" He looked at her for a long moment. "You know why." "I want to hear you say it." Something moved through his face. The war of it was visible. The man who'd spent 2 years keeping everything locked down, fighting the man who'd just told his pastor exactly where the town could put its opinions. The one who needed won. "Because the best part of every day," he said, "is when you come through that door. And I know that's not fair to you. I know it's too much. I know you've got your own grief and your own life, and I don't have the right to ask for anything. But you asked me to say it plain, so I'm saying it." Maggie set the sewing down very carefully on the table. She looked at her own hands for a moment. When she looked up, her eyes were bright in a way that wasn't tears, but was close to them. "Thomas has been gone 7 months, she said quietly. "And for most of that time, I've been telling myself that coming here every day is just about Lily. Just about the practical thing, the right thing, the decent thing." She paused. "I've been lying to myself." Jack didn't move. "I come here because of Lily," she said, "and I come here because of you. And I have been trying very hard not to know that, because knowing it is—" She stopped, started again. "Because it is terrifying, Jack. It is the most terrifying thing, to start to care about something again after you've lost everything. Do you understand that?" "Yes," he said. "God help me, yes I do." They looked at each other across the table, and everything that was too complicated to be said out loud sat between them in the quiet, and neither of them moved toward the other, and neither of them pulled back. And then Lily woke up. She woke with a sound that was 100% opinion, loud, clear, immediate. The sound of a baby who had decided that whatever was happening in this room was less important than the fact that she was awake and needed to announce it. Both of them turned to look at her. She was sitting up in the crib, hair sticking up on one side, fixed on them with those wide, serious eyes. Jack made a sound that was mostly exhale and partly something much closer to a real laugh. "She's got timing," he said. "She really does." Maggie stood, and the movement broke the particular intensity of the moment. Let some air back into the room. But it didn't undo anything. Nothing that had just happened could be undone, and both of them knew it. "I'll get her." "Maggie." She turned. "Thank you," he said, "for saying it out loud." She held his gaze for a beat. "Don't thank me yet," she said quietly. "Being terrified doesn't mean I know what to do about it." She picked Lily up, and the baby grabbed her hair with both fists and pulled, and Maggie made a sound of startled protest and disentangled herself. And Lily thought this was magnificent and said so loudly. And Jack sat at the table and watched the two of them and felt something move through his chest that was so large and so complicated that he had no name for it yet. He didn't need a name for it right now. It was enough just to feel it. It was enough to know it was there. What he didn't know, what neither of them knew, sitting in that cabin in the thick afternoon heat with Lily pulling at Maggie's hair, was that Eleanor Bryce had not gone home after leaving the Turner place that morning. She'd gone to see Robert Aldridge. Robert Aldridge was the eldest of the Aldridge family, second-generation Colorado, owned the most land in the valley, sat on the county land board, and had been very quietly interested in the Turner property since before Ruth was in the ground. A dying ranch with no clear succession was exactly the kind of opportunity that men like Robert Aldridge were patient enough to wait for. He'd been patient. He'd been watching. And Eleanor Bryce, who had known him for 20 years and trusted him with a particular blind trust of people who've never had cause not to, sat across from him in his study and told him everything. About Maggie coming every day, about the town's whispers, about Jack Turner, isolated and grief-worn, and increasingly, dangerously, not as alone as he'd been. Robert Aldridge listened carefully. He asked 3 specific questions. He thanked Eleanor for her concern and saw her out. Then he sat for a long time in his study, thinking. A man in love was a distracted man. A man with something to protect was a man who made mistakes. And a property dispute that had been quietly simmering in county records for 18 months had just, potentially, become a great deal more interesting. He picked up a pen. He began to write. And 40 miles away in Denver, in a law office that smelled of pipe tobacco and old paper, a man named Garrett would receive that letter in 4 days' time, and would read it twice, and would begin to make plans. Neither Maggie nor Jack knew any of this yet. But Thursday was coming. Thursday came on fast and mean. Jack was at the fence line on the east side of the property when he heard the horses, 2 of them moving at a deliberate pace up the main road, not the casual amble of a neighbor stopping by, not the hurry of someone with an emergency. The kind of pace that said whoever was coming had already decided how the conversation was going to go before they arrived. He set down the post driver and turned around. 2 men he didn't recognize were dismounting at his gate, both dressed too well for field work, too stiff for frontiermen. The particular pressed and polished look of people who'd come from somewhere with paved streets and indoor plumbing, and thought that made them worth something. The taller one carried a leather satchel. The other one, younger, softer, with a face that hadn't learned to hide its own self-importance yet, was already looking at the property with the assessing squint of someone calculating its value. Jack walked toward them without hurrying. Jack Turner, the tall one spoke first. He had the measured, pleasant voice of a man who'd practiced being disarming. Who's asking? My name is Garrett. Daniel Garrett, of Garrett and Hollis in Denver. He opened the satchel with practiced ease. I represent the interests of Robert Aldridge in a matter of property record. I have some documents here that require your immediate attention. Jack stopped walking. Robert Aldridge sent lawyers to my fence line. Mr. Aldridge has made several attempts to contact you through proper channels over the past 18 months regarding an outstanding boundary dispute on your eastern acreage. As those attempts have gone unanswered, those attempts went unanswered because they weren't legitimate, Jack said. His voice was level, very level. The kind of level that took work to maintain. That boundary was settled by my father's deed in 1861, and it has not changed. With respect, Mr. Turner, the county records from that period are... Garrett smiled the smile of a man who had won this particular argument many times before. Somewhat inconsistently maintained. There are questions about the original survey that Mr. Aldridge believes warrant a formal review. He held out a folded document. This is a notice of contested claim. You have 30 days to respond through the county land board, or the claim defaults in Mr. Aldridge's favor. Jack took the paper. He looked at it. He did not open it. Get off my property, he said. Garrett's smile didn't waver. Mr. Turner, I understand this is unexpected. It's not unexpected. Jack looked up from the paper, and something in his face made the younger lawyer take a half step back without deciding to. Robert Aldridge has wanted this land for 15 years. I know it, my father knew it before he died, and every man in this valley with eyes in his head knows it. The only thing unexpected is that he finally decided to put it on paper. He folded the notice and put it in his back pocket. Now I said get off my property. I won't say it again. They got. He stood at the fence line and watched them ride back down the road until they were gone. And then he turned and looked at the east acreage. The 60 acres his father had broken his back over. The ground where the creek ran through. The most valuable piece of the Turner land by a significant margin. And he felt something cold settle in his stomach despite the heat. 30 days. County Land Board. Robert Aldridge, who owned the bank that held his remaining mortgage and sat on every board that mattered in a 2-county radius. He needed a lawyer of his own. In Dry Willow, which had no lawyer. Which meant Denver. Which cost money he did not currently have. He picked up the post driver and went back to work, because stopping wasn't an option, and never had been. But his mind was moving fast, and none of the directions it moved in were comfortable. He didn't tell Maggie when she came the next morning. He watched himself not tell her, and understood that it was the wrong choice, and made it anyway, because she had enough to carry, and because this was his problem, and because, if he was being honest, which he was trying to be, he didn't want to see the worry that would come into her face when she heard it. He didn't want to put that there. She noticed something was wrong within 5 minutes. She always noticed. It was one of the things about her that he'd stopped being surprised by and started quietly depending on. The way she read a room, read him, without appearing to try. She came in, she took Lily. She looked at him once across the kitchen and said nothing. She let him have his silence for as long as it took for him to realize it was pointless. He was at the counter, pretending to look for something in a cabinet, when she said behind him, "Whatever it is, saying it out loud makes it smaller." He turned around. She was sitting at the table with Lily on her knee, and she was looking at him with that direct, patient expression that somehow managed to be neither demanding nor soft, just present, just open. He pulled out the notice and put it on the table. She read it. Her expression changed very little, but her hand on Lily's back stopped moving, then started again. Then she looked up. "Aldridge," she said. "Yes." "Robert Aldridge, who owns 1/3 of the county." "The same." She set the paper down. Her jaw had gone slightly tight. "He waited until you were at your lowest," she said. "After Ruth, after the fever. He waited until you were worn down, and then he sent lawyers." She said it quietly, like she was working through it, but there was something hard running under the quiet. That man didn't wait 18 months because the paperwork was complicated. He waited because he thought you'd be easier to roll over now. "That's about the size of it," Jack said. "Your deed is legitimate?" "Absolutely." "Do you have a copy?" "In the strongbox. My father kept every record going back to the original filing." She nodded. She looked at the notice again. "You need a lawyer." "I need a lawyer I can't pay for, in a city that's a day's ride away, in 30 days. He said it without self-pity, just the facts lined up in a row. "I've got options. They're not good ones." "What are they?" "I can ride to Denver, find someone willing to work on the promise of payment after harvest, hope the county board hasn't already decided the outcome before I walk in. Or I can take the board on myself, which in Aldridge's county is a guaranteed loss," she said. "Yes." Lily grabbed the notice off the table and attempted to put it in her mouth. Maggie retrieved it with the automatic, distracted efficiency of someone accustomed to the baby's appetites. "I know someone in Denver," she said. "A solicitor. Thomas used him when we bought the New Mexico property. He's a fair man. He doesn't take cases he can't win, but he doesn't run from fights either. Jack looked at her. I'm not asking you to. You didn't ask me. She folded the notice and pushed it back across the table toward him. Write to him today. I'll give you his address. Tell him what you told me. The deed, the original survey, all of it. And tell him Robert Aldridge is behind it. Why does that last part matter? Something moved through her expression. Because men like Aldridge make enemies on the way up. A smart lawyer knows who Aldridge has crossed before, and who might be glad to see him crossed again. She paused. Thomas taught me that. Jack was quiet for a moment. You're very good at this, he said. At what? Staying calm when it counts. She looked down at Lily. I'm not calm, she said. I'm furious. I've just had practice at not letting it show. He felt something in him that was partly admiration and partly a pain he couldn't quite locate. Maggie, write the letter, she said. Today. Don't wait. Aldridge is already moving, and every day you don't is a day you're giving him. He wrote the letter. It went out on the afternoon stage, and then they waited. And waiting in a crisis is its own particular kind of suffering. The days stretched. Jack worked the ranch and watched the road, and did not talk about what was coming. Maggie came every morning and watched him not talk about it, and did not push, because she understood the kind of man who needed to carry something in silence before he could put it down. What she didn't tell him, what she was carrying in her own silence during those days, was that Eleanor Bryce had come back. Not to the Turner place this time, to Maggie's own cabin, early on a Tuesday morning, before the sun was properly up. And this time she had brought company. Clara Henderson. And Dot Paulson, who was the closest thing Dry Willow had to a social arbiter. A small woman with sharp eyes and a memory like a steel trap, who could recite every piece of frontier gossip going back 12 years, and frequently did. Maggie had opened the door in her house dress, with her hair down, and found all three of them standing on her porch, and had understood immediately that this was not a visit. It was a presentation, a formal one. She let them in anyway. She put water on. She sat down across from them and waited. Eleanor did the talking, as Maggie had expected. She was not unkind about it. Maggie would give her that. She was never unkind. She just believed every word she said with a certainty that made the words land harder than cruelty might have. She said that the situation had gone on too long. She said that Lily Turner needed a proper mother, not a neighborly arrangement. She said that what Maggie was giving the child was real and good, but that what it was doing to Maggie's own reputation was not, and that a woman alone on the frontier could not afford to be talked about, because talk became truth, whether it was or not. She said all of this carefully, with the best intentions, and it landed on Maggie like a slow, heavy weight being placed one stone at a time on her chest. And then Dot Paulson said the thing that the other two hadn't said yet. Harriet Voss has written to Jack Turner twice more, Dot said. She said it quietly, with the precision of someone who knew exactly how much damage the information would do. She's coming to Dry Willow at the end of the month. He invited her. The room went very still. I don't believe that, Maggie said. Her voice came out even, barely. I read the letter myself, Dot said. Ben Hargreaves showed it to me. He's the one who delivered the reply. Harriet is a fine woman, Maggie. Stable, respectable, no complications. A pause. The kind of arrangement that makes sense for a man in Jack's position. Maggie looked at her hands on the table. They were very still. Everything about her was very still. Thank you for coming, she said. I appreciate your concern. It took considerable effort to say it without breaking anything. She thought about it all the way to Jack's place the next morning. She thought about it while she fed Lily, who was full of opinions about the morning and expressed them at length. She thought about it while Jack moved around the kitchen behind her, and she felt the weight of it, the not knowing, the possibility that Dot Paulson was right, the probability that she'd built something in her own mind that hadn't been building at all in his. And it was the loneliest feeling she'd had since Thomas died. She almost didn't ask. She had her mouth open to say something ordinary about the water pump, which had been making a sound it shouldn't, when she heard herself say instead, "Is Harriet Voss coming to Dry Willow?" Jack went completely still. He had his back to her. He was at the stove, and he went so completely still that she could track the exact moment the question landed by the sudden, total absence of movement. He turned around. His face was doing the complicated thing again, the thing that meant he was working very hard to manage what was underneath. "Where did you hear that?" he said. "Is it true?" "Maggie, Jack," her voice came out sharper than she intended. "Just answer me." He set the pan down. He leaned back against the counter and crossed his arms and looked at her with something that was half guilt and half something harder to read. "I wrote back to her," he said. "Once. 2 weeks ago. Before—" He stopped. "Before Thursday. Before I told you what I'd told you." "What did you tell her?" "That she was welcome to come through if she was in the territory." He said it carefully, like a man who understood the exact weight of every word he was using. "That was all I said. That's the truth." "And she's coming." "I got a letter yesterday saying she planned to." Maggie looked at Lily. Lily looked back at her, serene and oblivious, chewing on her own fist. Maggie breathed in through her nose slowly, out through her mouth. She did this once. "All right," she said. "Maggie, listen, I understand it," she said. Precisely, evenly. Like she was building a wall, one brick at a time, and needed every brick to be exactly straight. "You've got a daughter who needs more than I can give her in the way I'm currently giving it. Harriet Voss is a real option. A practical one. I told you I understood you had to think about those." She stood up with Lily and went to the crib and set the baby down gently. "I understand." "I don't think you do." He pushed off from the counter. He came to stand closer than he usually stood. Close enough that she could see the lines around his eyes that the summer had deepened. The particular kind of tired that had been living in him so long, it was just part of his face now. "I wrote to her before you, and I said what we said to each other. Before I knew, before either of us said it plainly. And I should have told you about the letter instead of letting you hear it from someone else." He paused. "That was cowardly. I'm not a coward. I don't want to be one with you." She looked up at him. "So what are you saying?" "I'm saying I don't want Harriet Voss," he said. Flat and plain and direct, the way he said everything that mattered. "I want—" He stopped. The stopness of it was its own kind of answer, the enormous, complicated, terrifying thing that lived inside the silence where the rest of the sentence should have been. "I don't want to make promises I don't have the right to make yet. But I wanted you to know that part plainly. Whatever happens with Aldridge, whatever happens with the land, that part is plain." Lily made a sound from the crib. Neither of them looked at her. Maggie held Jack's gaze for a long moment. Everything in her, the practical part, the careful part, the part that had learned how fast things you loved could be taken away, said to move slowly, said to be cautious, said that she was standing on uncertain ground and needed to watch her footing. And then she said, "Tell Harriet Voss thank you for considering the trip." Jack's expression shifted. Something unlocked in it. "Yeah?" he said. "And that the position has been filled," she said. The silence that followed was the good kind. He nodded once, and there was something in his face that was simpler than anything she'd seen on it before. Not happy exactly, not yet, because there was still too much between here and anything that could honestly be called happiness. But something quieter and more fundamental than that. Something that looked, if she had to name it, like relief. Like a man who had just found out that what he thought he might have, he actually had. The reply to Harriet Voss went out on Thursday's stage, short and final and courteous, the way Jack did things. He didn't show it to Maggie. She didn't ask to see it. But that same afternoon, the letter from Denver arrived. The solicitor's name was Hayes. Thomas Calloway had spoken well of him, and the letter proved it. Direct, technical, completely unimpressed by Robert Aldridge's name or money, and containing one sentence near the end that Jack read 3 times because he wanted to make sure he'd understood it correctly. He had. He crossed the cabin in 4 strides and handed the letter to Maggie, who read it once, fast, and then looked up. "He says Aldridge filed the same type of claim against a homesteader named Debs 4 years ago," she said, "and lost, on nearly identical grounds." "The survey records," Jack said. "Hayes says the original survey data refutes Aldridge's boundary argument outright. He says if we can get the county board to admit the 1861 documentation into evidence, the claim falls apart." "If," Maggie said. "Aldridge sits on the board. He can't rule on a case that directly benefits him," she said. "That's grounds for recusal." "In theory. No, in practice too, if there's someone there to demand it." She was already thinking. He could see it. The same focused, rapid quality she'd had the morning she'd walked through his door and assessed Lily and made a decision inside of 30 seconds. Hayes needs to be there in person, standing in that room, because the moment Aldridge tries to rule on his own claim with Hayes watching, Hayes will have grounds for a formal complaint to the State Land Commission, and Robert Aldridge knows it. She set the letter down. "This is winnable, Jack." He looked at her. "You sound very certain." "I am certain." She met his eyes. "Men like Aldridge are used to winning because nobody fights back. You're going to fight back, and you're not going to be fighting alone." The way she said that last part, not as a declaration, not as a grand gesture, just as a plain statement of fact, the way she said everything that she meant, landed somewhere in him that was past words, past the particular careful language they'd been using with each other for the past 3 weeks. He reached across the table and covered her hand with his. She looked down at it, back up at him. Neither of them spoke. There was nothing that needed saying right then that couldn't be said better by the fact of his hand on hers and the fact that she didn't pull it away. Outside, the summer heat pressed down on Dry Willow without mercy. Inside, Lily had fallen asleep in her crib, one fist curled under her chin, her breathing steady and deep and certain, the way children breathe when they are completely and entirely safe. And in Denver, Hayes was already packing his case. And in his study, Robert Aldridge was writing a second letter to a man named Garrett, because the first plan was showing signs of complication, and men like Aldridge always had a second plan. It was going to get harder before it got easier. Both of them knew that. But Jack Turner's hand was on Maggie Calloway's, and she was not pulling away. And that was the thing that mattered right now. That was the thing they were going to hold on to when it got harder. That was enough. Hayes arrived on a Wednesday, 2 days earlier than expected, which was the first sign that things had moved faster than anyone had planned. Jack was at the well when the stage came through, and he recognized the man before he'd fully stepped down. Mid-50s, compact, with the kind of deliberate economy of movement that belonged to people who didn't waste anything. Not time, not words, not steps. He carried one bag and a document case that was clearly heavier than it looked. And he shook Jack's hand with a grip that said he'd been in rooms with harder men than Robert Aldridge and had not been impressed by any of them. "Mr. Turner," he said, "we need to talk before the hearing. There are developments." "What kind of developments?" "The kind that tell me Aldridge knows his claim is weak and has decided to change the game." Hayes picked up his bag. "Is there somewhere we can speak privately?" They sat at Jack's table, and Hayes opened the document case, and what he laid out over the next 20 minutes rearranged everything Jack thought he understood about the situation. Aldridge had withdrawn the boundary claim. That was the first thing. Filed a formal withdrawal with the county board 3 days ago. Quiet, no announcement. The kind of legal retreat that happened when a man knew he was going to lose and wanted to disappear the evidence before anyone could point to it. Hayes had found out through his contact on the Land Commission, which was the only reason they knew it all. Jack stared at the withdrawal paperwork. "It's over?" "The boundary claim is over," Hayes said. "No." He put a second document on the table. "This is what it isn't over." It was a petition, formal, legal, filed with the county family court, which in Dry Willow operated out of the same building as the land board, with most of the same men sitting on it. The petitioner was Robert Aldridge. The subject was Lily Turner. The petition alleged that Jack Turner, a widower without stable domestic arrangement, was failing to provide adequate care for an infant child, and requested that the county appoint a guardian review. The first step in a process that could, if the review went against Jack, result in the court assuming temporary custody of Lily and placing her with a family deemed more suitable. The room was very quiet. "He can't do this," Jack said. His voice had gone to a place she'd never heard it. Not loud, not sharp, just stripped, like something had been removed from it. "She's my daughter. She's healthy. She's fed. She is," Hayes said. "And I believe any legitimate review would confirm that. But a review can be shaped. The witnesses called, the testimony heard, all of that is within the board's discretion. And Aldridge has been talking to people." He paused. "There are 3 individuals who have already agreed to testify that your domestic situation is, quote, unstable and concerning. I don't have all the names yet. I have 2 of them." He put a third sheet on the table. Eleanor Bryce, Dot Paulson. Jack pushed back from the table and stood up. He walked to the window and stood there with his back to the room. And Hayes let him stand there, because Hayes was a man who understood when to wait. "When is the review?" Jack said finally. "Monday. 4 days." "Can you fight it?" "I can fight it," Hayes said. "I have the medical record from Lily's recovery showing she received proper care. I have the fact that she is currently in excellent health. I have your property records and financial standing." A pause. "But I will tell you plainly what I told Thomas Calloway every time he came to me with a problem. The law is only as strong as the room it's argued in. Aldridge can't win the boundary claim, so he's moved to the thing you can't deed your way out of." Hayes looked at him steadily. "He's going after what you love." Jack turned around. Something had settled on his face that was harder than anger. Colder. The kind of expression that didn't come from rage, but from a man who had just made a very clear decision and intended to honor it. "I need to talk to Maggie," he said. She was at her own place when he arrived, mending fence on the north side of her property. Sleeves rolled up, hair pinned back, moving with the efficient focus that was just her way of being in the world. She saw him coming and read his face from 40 yards away and set down the wire she was holding. He told her everything. Standing at her fence line in the morning heat, he laid it out flat and plain. The withdrawn boundary claim, the petition, Eleanor and Dot, Monday's hearing, all of it. He watched her face as he talked and saw it move through shock and anger and then into something that was very still and very focused. When he finished, she said nothing for a moment. Then, "He went after Lily." "Yes." "Because he couldn't take the land, he went after your daughter." "Yes." "That man," she said, quietly, in a tone that was more dangerous than shouting would have been, "has made a very serious mistake." Jack looked at her. "Maggie, if you testify on my behalf, Aldridge will use it. He'll use everything between us. He'll use the gossip. I know what he'll use," she said. "It could damage you, your reputation. You're standing here, Jack." She said his name the way she said things she meant completely. "Look at me." He looked at her. "That little girl grabbed my finger on the first day, and she has not let go," she said. "She is not going to lose her father, because Robert Aldridge is a coward who punishes children when he can't bully men. I don't care what it costs me." She picked up the wire she'd set down and handed it to him, because her hands needed something to do, and there was still fence to mend. "I'm testifying, and you're going to help me finish this fence first, because it isn't going to mend itself." He took the wire. He worked beside her in silence for a while, then he said, "There's something else I need to say." She kept working. "Say it." "If I walk into that hearing on Monday as a single father with a neighbor who comes for breakfast, Aldridge has a story. If I walk in as a man whose family is whole—" He stopped. He'd planned this. He'd organized it in his mind on the ride over. And now that he was saying it, he found that the organized version had left him, and what was coming out instead was just the unguarded truth. "I've been doing this wrong," he said. "I've been holding back because I didn't think I had the right yet. Because it's been too soon. Because of Ruth. Because of Thomas. Because—" He set the wire down. "I'm not holding back anymore." She looked up from the fence. "Marry me," he said. It came out plain and direct, the way everything that mattered came out of him. Not because of Monday, not because of Aldridge, because Lily has been trying to tell us something for 3 weeks, and we keep not listening. He held her gaze. "Because I meant what I said at that table. Because every morning you come through my door, I understand something about my own life I didn't understand the day before." He paused. "And because I am done being afraid of what I want." Maggie looked at him for a long time. The summer settled around them, the heat and the dust and the dry smell of the Colorado grass. And she looked at him the way she sometimes looked at Lily, with a kind of attention that was beyond words, that was just pure presence, pure seeing. "That's the least romantic proposal I have ever heard," she said. "I know. You didn't even take your gloves off." He looked down at his hands, pulled the gloves off, held them. Something in her expression, the precise controlled thing she kept so carefully, broke open. Not into tears, into something warmer and more fundamental. Into the particular expression of a woman who had been carrying something heavy for a very long time and had just, cautiously, set it down. "Yes," she said. "Obviously, yes." He didn't move right away. He stood there and let it be real for a moment, because some things needed a second before you acted on them, needed to be felt fully before the next thing started. Then he stepped forward and put his arms around her, carefully at first, and then not carefully at all. And she put her face against his shoulder, and he felt her exhale, the long, released, total exhale of someone who had been holding their breath for 7 months. They stayed like that for a while. Neither of them said anything. There was nothing that needed saying that wasn't already being said. They told Hayes that evening. He didn't smile exactly, but something shifted in his expression that was close to satisfaction. He looked at them across the table and said, "That changes the picture considerably," and picked up his pen and started rewriting his opening argument. They were married the next morning. Pastor Mills performed the ceremony, who had the grace to look neither surprised nor anything other than genuinely moved when they appeared at his door, Maggie in her cleanest dress, Jack in his good shirt, Lily on Maggie's hip, looking like she had arranged the whole thing and was pleased with how it had come out. The pastor asked the questions. They answered them. He pronounced them married with an efficiency that respected the urgency and a warmth that respected the meaning. And when it was done, he shook Jack's hand and kissed Maggie on the cheek and said, "I owe you both an apology." And Jack said, "No, you don't," and meant it completely. They rode back to the Turner place, which was now both their places, and Hayes was waiting on the porch with his document case and the look of a man who had spent the night revising his strategy and was pleased with the results. Sunday was a preparation. Hayes questioned them both, separately and together, about everything. The timeline of Lily's illness, Maggie's nursing, the medical record, the day-to-day routine that had developed since. He was thorough and unsentimental, and at one point made Maggie retell the morning she'd first come through the door so many times that she came very close to throwing her coffee cup at him, which Hayes seemed to take as a sign she was ready. Monday came. The county hearing room was a single-story building with more wood than dignity, and windows that let in the heat and the flies with equal generosity. By 9 in the morning, it was standing room, which told them everything they needed to know about how far the gossip had traveled and how much of the valley had an opinion about the outcome. Robert Aldridge arrived at 5 minutes past 9. He was a big man, well-fed, with the settled authority of someone who had been the most important person in every room he'd entered for 20 years. He sat at the board table and looked at Jack and Maggie with an expression that was perfectly composed and absolutely opaque. Jack looked back at him and did not look away. The board chairman, a man named Fowler, who was visibly uncomfortable with everything happening in his room, called the session to order and began with the standard language. Hayes sat beside Jack and Maggie with his document case open, still and ready, the way he was always still and ready. Eleanor Bryce testified first. She said what she'd said. The arrangement was inappropriate. The domestic situation was unstable. A child needed proper structure. She said it with conviction, and she said it looking at the table rather than at Maggie's face, which told Maggie that Eleanor's conscience was working even if Eleanor's mouth wasn't listening to it. Dot Paulson testified second. She was more specific. Dates, observations, the letter from Harriet Voss, the general unsettledness of the situation. She was good at it. She'd had practice. Then Hayes stood up. He was quiet for a moment. He let the room settle. Then he put 3 documents on the board table and said, "Gentlemen, the child in question is Lily Ruth Turner, 11 months of age. I have here the signed statement of the attending physician confirming that Lily Turner is, as of 3 days ago, in excellent health, well-fed, well-developed, and showing no signs of neglect or instability of any kind." He put the first document down. I have here a signed affidavit from Margaret Turner, formerly Margaret Calloway, confirming that she and Jack Turner were married yesterday morning in this county, witnessed by Pastor Mills, recorded with the clerk's office before 8 o'clock this morning. He put the second document down. And I have here, he said, and his voice didn't change, stayed exactly as level as it had been, a formal complaint filed this morning with the Colorado State Land Commission, documenting Robert Aldridge's pattern of filing fraudulent boundary claims against neighboring properties, including the claim filed and subsequently withdrawn against Jack Turner 14 days ago. The room changed. Aldridge's expression didn't move, but something behind it did. "That complaint," Hayes continued, "has been co-signed by 3 former landowners who lost property to Aldridge through similar proceedings over the past 8 years, and it requests a full audit of every county land board decision in which Mr. Aldridge participated as a voting member." He looked at Aldridge directly. "Including this one." Chairman Fowler had gone the color of old flour. Several of the board members were looking at the table. The room was making the particular sound of people who are trying to decide which way to move before things fall on them. Aldridge looked at Hayes. "This is a custody hearing," he said, "not a land matter." "You're right," Hayes said pleasantly. "It is a custody hearing. A custody hearing you initiated, about a child who, by every measurable standard, is thriving in the care of 2 parents who are now legally married and have no outstanding concerns flagged by any medical professional or law enforcement official in this county." He paused. "So I'm asking the board to dismiss this petition, today, with prejudice. And I'm asking on the record, so that the dismissal is part of the public record that the State Commission will be reviewing." The silence lasted about 10 seconds. Then Fowler said, very quietly, "Mr. Aldridge, given the circumstances, I think perhaps a recess to consider." "Dismiss it," Aldridge said. Everyone looked at him. His voice was flat, controlled. The voice of a man who was cutting his losses with as much dignity as he could salvage. "I withdraw the petition. The child is clearly in adequate care." He stood, buttoned his jacket, and looked across the room at Jack Turner one more time. Something passed between them that was beyond the law, and beyond the documents, and beyond the hearing room. The plain acknowledgement between 2 men that this was not finished, that Aldridge was not the kind of man who forgot. Jack held his gaze without blinking, without moving, without anything on his face except a steady, clear refusal to be the smaller man in the room. Aldridge left. The room exhaled all at once. Hayes sat down. He looked completely unsurprised. He closed his document case. "That," he said, to no one in particular, "is what preparation looks like." Outside, in the heat of the Monday morning, Maggie was standing on the steps holding Lily when the door opened and Jack came out. She looked at his face and knew before he said a word. "It's done," he said. She let out a breath. Lily grabbed her collar. "Hayes?" she asked. "Already talking to Fowler about the commission audit." Jack came down the steps and stood beside her. Around them, the Valley people were filing out of the hearing room, some avoiding their eyes, some nodding. Hank Pruitt catching Jack's gaze and giving him a look that was about as close to an apology as Hank was ever going to manage. Pete Dalton stopped beside them. "Congratulations," he said, looking at both of them. Just that. But he said it like he meant it, and in a town like Dry Willow, that was enough. Pastor Mills put his hand briefly on Jack's shoulder as he passed. Even Clara Henderson, coming out with her basket on her arm, paused. She looked at Maggie for a long moment. Maggie looked back. Then Clara said, "She's a beautiful child, Maggie," and kept walking. And that was Clara Henderson's version of everything she hadn't said for 3 weeks. Maggie looked down at Lily. Lily was studying a button on Maggie's dress with the focused intensity of a scientist on the verge of a major breakthrough. She had Jack's stubbornness and Ruth's eyes and some third quality that was entirely her own, a brightness, a certainty, that suggested she had arrived in the world knowing exactly who she was and was simply waiting for everyone else to catch up. Jack reached over and put his hand on Lily's back. She looked up immediately, found his face, and smiled the particular smile, wide and complete and absolutely sure, that she reserved only for him. "Hey, girl," he said quietly. Lily grabbed his finger, held on. Maggie felt the warmth of his arm against hers, and the weight of the baby between them, and the particular solid realness of a morning that had required everything they had and had given back more than they'd known to ask for. She thought about the note on the door, those 4 desperate words nailed to the wood in the middle of a July that had wanted to bury them both. She thought about the gate she'd stopped at, the choice she'd made, the way Lily had turned her head that first morning like a flower finding the light. She thought about Thomas briefly, and held the thought with a gentle care she'd learned to give it. Not grief anymore, not the sharp kind, just a quiet gratitude that he had taught her what it was to love someone completely, so that she knew what it felt like when it was happening again. "You ready to go home?" Jack asked. She turned and looked at him, this man with his careful hands and his locked-up grief and his stubborn, unshakable love for the child on her hip. And the word home settled into her chest like something that had been waiting there a long time, looking for somewhere to land. "Yes," she said. "Let's go home." They walked back to the wagon together, the 3 of them, through the full force of the Colorado summer, and Lily laughed at something only she could see. And Jack's hand found Maggie's and held it, and not one person in Dry Willow who watched them go said a single word against it. Some things were simply true, and the truest things needed no defending, only the courage to choose them and the grace to hold on when everything tried to pull them loose. Jack Turner had found that courage in a note on a door, and a woman who had stopped at a gate she had every reason to walk past. Maggie Turner had found it in a baby who grabbed her finger and refused to let go. And Lily, who had started all of it by simply refusing to quit, slept the whole ride home in her mother's arms, full and warm and completely certain of her place in the world, as she had been from the very first day, all along.